Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back from lunch. Hopefully we're all awake and alert, ready for Andrew Jones, who is kindly offered to step in for Michelle Dix, who's been struck down by COVID. All very 2020, but anyway. Andrew is a senior policy advisor at the NIC, National Infrastructure Commission, who led the Interurban Transport Project for the second National Infrastructure Assessment, which I think we heard about earlier on. I'm going to get off now and let Andrew talk, but I'll be back. Please welcome Andrew Jones.
Thanks very much, Eamon. And yes, the more observant view will have noticed I'm not Michelle Dix. Instead of a woman who is a National Infrastructure Commissioner with a wealth of experience in the transport industry, you've got a man who scored the fourth most runs for Actonian's 4th 11 cricket last summer. So, you know, big high-profile speakers. But the benefit is I did also write this part of the report, so hopefully I should know a little bit of what is in this element of the National Infrastructure Commission. So let me start with a very brief word on the Commission itself. We are an executive agency of the Treasury. We've been around for about 8 years now, and our remit is to provide the government with independent, long-term advice on the UK's infrastructure needs. Our remit covers all the sectors of economic infrastructure, so that includes transport, energy, water, wastewater, waste, and digital infrastructure. And I'm going to speak specifically, obviously, on interurban transport, but as part of our kind of work, we do look at the intersections and kind of cross-currents of policy across all the sectors, which gives us kind of unique perspective in the infrastructure world. We also, crucially, have to work within a given fiscal remit. All of our advice and recommendations have to fit within a maximum of 1.3% of GDP. And anyone who knows or who has ever worked with the Treasury will know that their first question on any recommendation you ever give to them will be, how much is this going to cost us? So the fact that everything we say is costed with the Treasury's own numbers gives us obviously a cachet when we make kind of recommendations on our infrastructure needs. We published our 5-yearly review of national infrastructure, the snappily titled National Infrastructure Assessment. We published that in October, and it covers the infrastructure needs of the UK over the next 20 to 30 years, how much they will cost, and what policy and regulatory changes will be needed to make them happen. The report this time focused on 3 key themes. Firstly, supporting regional growth. Originally, when we started the report, it was called Levelling Up, but we kind of changed that title a little bit as the political mood changed a bit. We're also looking at the supporting the transition to net zero, particularly with the energy sector, and improving the UK's climate resilience and the state of our natural environment. What I'm going to focus on now is the interurban part of the report, which talks about how we can move towards a more integrated system for our interurban transport, supported by strong regional bodies like our STBs, pan-regional partnerships, and mayoral combined authorities. I know that yesterday you had a great speech from Kate Willard, who talked to you about what we thought on urban transport. But this is specifically on interurban, and our kind of pithy definitions for the two is urban transport is journeys within places, and interurban journeys are between places. I suspect I'm going to be preaching to the converted on the need for integrated strategy at a conference called Interchange, but hopefully there'll still be some good questions after I finish speaking. So, our interurban transport network are the arteries that link our country together. They support trade and goods in services, but in order to keep them working, we must maintain them and maintain the standards of resilience that they currently have. This is going to get more difficult as time goes on, as asset age, and crucially, as our climate changes. We recommended in the report that the level of resources committed to the control period and RIS should be at the level of RIS 2, so that's 27 billion, and then adjust in real terms. So that level of commitment and funding should stay for the long term. And crucially, that funding should pivot towards maintenance and away from enhancements compared to previous RIS settlements. However, maintenance alone won't address the structural challenges in regional inequality. Ultimately, if we keep the network the same, we'll have the same economy, broadly speaking. So we also need to think about enhancements. Now, the Commission recommended and believes that in order for our enhancements to support an economic strategy that improves regional growth, we must concentrate on connectivity enhancements that facilitate trade. It is far from clear that this is the strategy that is followed at the moment. To be perfectly honest, it's far from clear what the strategy is that's followed at the moment. Anyone that's read the RIS will know it's got a great section on objectives, and it's got some nice pictures, then it's got an end bit that says, oh, and here's the list. And it's not really clear how one follows from the other. So at the very least, the Commission is asking for more objectivity in how that happens. It's also clear that at the moment, as structured, previous RISs aren't structured to support regional growth. 22% of enhancements funding in the last RIS went to the North and Midlands, only 22%. So we say that prioritisation should be taken under systematic analysis of the most important trading links, particularly links between our key cities and our largest freight hubs. We then need to ask, of those links, which are the ones that are currently underperforming? Now, to begin this process, the Commission has done some of our own analysis. You may have seen it, we've published it. We focused on roads because we believed, whilst we were doing the 2 years of work for the assessment, that the country actually had a pretty good rail plan. It was called the IRP, you might remember it, and we thought it was quite good because we helped write it with the rail needs assessment. So 2 weeks before, the government decided that they would abandon that. So what we have called for in those 2 weeks of hasty rewrites was that the government should once again have a kind of integrated rail plan. I'll probably have to find a different title for it, but another integrated rail plan which clearly sets out the pipeline of key rail upgrades over the next 30 years. But now, as I say, we'll stick with roads, well, because we've published a map of roads, which is always nice. People love maps, and it's on page 91 of the assessment. Rather than putting it up here and everyone spying the tiny little details of the roads that they like, go to page 91 of the assessment on the website. It's great. You'll love it. We've not created a map of literal projects. What we have done is started from the widest part of the kind of funnel for the process we want. What we have done is identified the key links that we think would support trade and therefore regional growth and regional rebalancing. And then we have examined amongst these key links what are the ones that perform least well at the moment. And then we have identified a kind of realistic pipeline of 30 years worth of potential enhancements. As I say, this is not a list of ready-to-go projects. Some of them will have projects. There's a linking kind of Tilbury and the kind of Kent coast that, obviously that's going to be the Lower Thames crossing. But there's other areas where it's less obvious what the upgrade would be. But we think this should be the starting point for the government's approach to an integrated strategy. You should start with the problems and then work to the solutions. And too often at the moment, what the government has is a list of solutions, the immediate solutions, then a kind of vague list of potential solutions of whom we don't know what the status is. We also acknowledge in the report, and I think this is a key point, that no desk-based exercise from Whitehall will ever fully identify what the needs are for regional rebalancing. This kind of approach and this top-down national analysis must be supplemented by good regional data, particularly on land use and key economic opportunities that are always going to be invisible to a transport model based on the current network. Now, I see in the speaking notes at this point I'm supposed to extemporise on my extensive experience being a senior manager in TfL, which is going to be difficult for me. It would have been easy for Michelle. But I think one of the key points that I'm sure Michelle would make if she was here is the Levelling Up white paper talked about London-style transport for other areas of the country. And obviously, it was a political document, and what it meant by that is the kind of integrated customer experience people have in London of seamless transport, which is great, and obviously that's something we want to see. But what it also means is the kind of analytical capacity and tools that London has to analyse transport interventions in an integrated way, aligned with not just the kind of impact on the whole transport network, but also the land use data and the likely economic change you will see that sits behind that. And that's something that we think it's not impossible for us to have that in the rest of the country, and it should be an ambition of what we're moving towards. So going back specifically to the Commission's work and the national picture, as I've said, our overarching recommendation is that we should have a national integrated strategy. We should align processes for road and rail capital investment, and as I've said, we probably shouldn't rip up perfectly good rail plans. And we should have a common, those plans should be guided by a common set of economic objectives. It should incorporate the key corridors, ensuring that kind of transport solutions are considered holistically at a start before we jump straight to the schemes that we want to fund. This will open up the opportunity to think about our transport in a strategic way, but it will also give people the opportunity to integrate with those kind of key strategic long-term investments. If people have good visibility in regional bodies, in major cities, in local authorities, good visibility about what the strategic pipeline is, they will be able to maximise local investment to make the most of that. And finally, and crucially, it should also include a joined-up plan for decarbonisation. We have to get to net zero. We have to do it across all modes. And there are a variety of kind of perverse incentives that come especially towards the tail of decarbonisation if it's not considered holistically and as part of the same plan. So our call is that by the end of the 2026, the government should have developed such a strategy to frame the development of CP8 and RIS4. There's a key window of opportunity over the next 2 years where unusually, the DfT won't be kind of disappearing to write those kind of delivery plans. But it's no mean feat, and it will take a lot. So what are the next steps? Well, firstly, the government is bound to respond to the National Infrastructure Assessment within a year. That will take us to October 2024. And I'm sure it doesn't surprise many other people that there might be a few other things going on at that point. So we probably will give them a couple of months of leeway on that. And in the meantime, of course, we're continuing to engage with the DfT so they can understand our ideas better. But crucially, we also need people in this room that engage with our ideas and agree with them to talk about the report and to make those points in their kind of stakeholder engagement to the DfT that an integrated long-term strategy across interurban transport will help us with delivery. And I think finally, as I've said, there are I'm at the STB conference, there are a lot of people in this room with a lot of knowledge that goes well beyond anything that we could ever do at the NIC in terms of a national picture. We need to continue to work with our regional partners to flesh out for the next time we do this exercise where exactly those regional opportunities are for growth. I'll draw to a close there. Eamon.
Many thanks, Andrew. Very well spoken. Can't help but ask the next question, which is, without betraying your voting intentions, what would you suggest are the key differentiators between the Labour Party transport plan and the Conservative Party transport plan?
Well, I'm going to completely dodge the question as a good civil servant, obviously. But I think actually it does expose something really interesting about both the NIC and whether this plan's going to work. Because the only way you get a 30-year plan to work and be implemented is if you can build consensus around it. And frankly, that's what too much of our transport policy has been lacking. Now, as an independent executive agency, we as the Commission are actually allowed, quite unusually for civil servants, to go to talk to Labour and Conservative politicians and parliamentarians. And the one thing I think we would say to both of them is, you might have slightly different objectives about what you want to achieve, but ultimately, you need a process that puts your objectives first and then allows you to deliver that. And I think the process that we've outlined through the analysis we've done and the strategy we've done is a kind of sufficiently robust process that you could take a different set of transport objectives as your kind of guiding principle and then push them through an adaptive adaptive framework that would allow you to continue to fund the same core investments. I mean, most of the core investments will remain the same regardless of colour of government, and that would give a lot more certainty and help delivery. So I hope that's very expertly dodged, kind of committing to what, yeah.
Do we have any questions from the floor, please? Left-hand side.
It's Martin Tugwell, Chief Executive Transport for the North. I'd argue we've probably not far off some of the level of analytical capability that you talk about in London already in the North because of the investment there. Two things, Andrew. One is, I'd be interested to know what the Commission's view is about tackling the bias within the macroeconomic model that dominates Treasury thinking, which briefly means 10,000 jobs in the South are always going to be worth more than 10,000 jobs in the North, which is against levelling up. And the flip side of that, I'd just be interested to hear your point about people. So in the North, we've done work as TFN around social exclusion. Over 3.3 million people now, today, are in areas of high exclusion because they can't afford or they can't have access to transport. So I get the big picture, but I do worry that we're missing the user and actually failing to understand the challenges that a person living on a low-income, zero-hours contract might have in terms of some of these challenges.
Yeah, I think, I would totally agree, having seen a lot of TFN's analytical capability firsthand, that the work you're doing is exactly the kind of stuff that we're talking about. On the first point, I think specifically for our analysis, the way we short-circuited this is that we used population as a proxy rather than productivity or kind of economic metrics. One person is one person wherever they are in the country, and that's how we weighted our analysis. We did think about kind of a very complicated kind of productivity potential, i.e. kind of catch-up growth, but frankly, it's debatable the extra value doing all that extra effort would get you other than just weighting people the same. So that's our view, and that's something we'd urge the Treasury to look at. On the second question, I think transport-related social exclusion definitely fits within the Commission's objectives in our quality of life framework. And ultimately, as I've said to the first question, your objectives sit at the top of this, and they are kind of political processes. Politicians can set the objectives, and that's hopefully what we should want them to do. And then technocrats devise processes that allow you to deliver these. So I think our answer would be that this kind of approach is sufficiently adaptable that if you value social exclusion and the kind of quality of life benefits that transport can give, you can weight them accordingly in addition or instead of the sheer productivity kind of high value economic trips that traditional appraisal has done. So that's I think the approach that we should be thinking about.
Hi, Andy Brown from Manchester Airports Group. You talked about how the government has to respond to your assessment, but I think lots of examples of how they have chosen, regardless of their response, to disregard some of the recommendations from the Commission. You talked about the integrated rail plan, for example, being a good example of that. I'm just interested in whether you think there's a pathway to a point where it's more painful for the government to ignore the long-term recommendations from the Commission, with a holy grail, I guess, of getting to more like an OBR type situation where if they go against what you say, they really feel the pain of that?
Yeah, so I think, they do a lot of what we say. They do about 80% of the things we say, so we do have a reasonably good hit rate. But I think one of the ways in which we can kind of influence the debate is places like this, because basically a version of this, or a kind of integrated strategy for transport, is something that ministers will hear pretty much every transport conference they go to. And we just got to wear them down, because we're right, and we know we're right about this. So that is basically one of the kind of key things that the Commission is there to do. We're permanent, we're independent, and we will keep saying, when we think we're right and we're backed by analysis, we will keep saying it for the long term. We're here to stay, and we do eventually get through to them on this. And you just need to look at the kind of the record on Devo. Is the current Devo approach what we wanted in NAI1? Not exactly. Is it as fast as we want it to go? Probably not. Is it much further along 5 years later than the first time we said it in NAI1? Yeah, undeniably. So I think that is the solution. If we're right and we feel like we're backed by the analysis, we've just got to keep saying it to politicians until they're bored of hearing it.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Much appreciated. Unfortunately, we're out of time again on this presentation, but I'm sure Andrew will be available throughout the rest of the afternoon. Andrew, thank you very much.
Thank you.